As I rolled out one bright May morning to view the meadows and flowers gay, whom should I spy but my own true lover, as she sat under yon willow tree. I took off my hat and I did salute her. I did salute her most courageously.
Hello, Díomh Gachéine, agus fáilte róg go dtí Dingle Lit. Welcome everyone to Dingle Lit. I am absolutely honoured to welcome Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi and Abi Daré to Dingle Lit this year. We're zooming in, but we're so happy that you're both here with us. And I'm just going to give a brief introduction to both of you so all of our readers can familiarise themselves. So Abi grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, and is the author of The Girl with the Louding Voice, which was the winner of the Bath Novel Award. So that's an award whereby you submit a manuscript. So it means that they found great promise in her manuscript before it even turned into a book. And she was selected as a finalist in the Literary Consultancy Pen Factor competition in 2018. The Girl with the Louding Voice, it tells the story of Aduni, who's one of my favorite narrators, I think, of all time. I just wanted to meet her instantly from the first 5 pages when I read the book. She's got incredibly clear voice and truly has an astounding life in the book. I won't spoil it for you, but it's really remarkable, and there's such strength to be found in her character. Everything that she goes through is quite exceptional. And Jennifer is an award-winning Ugandan novelist and short story writer, who's also been awarded the prestigious Wyndham Campbell Prize for Fiction in 2018. And the first woman tells the story of Kirabo, who is small, headstrong, and flawed. And she's raised by doting grandparents in idyllic Nattetta in rural Uganda. And again, it's a really powerful story that reflects a lot on feminism and motherhood and kind of the origins of all of that, both for us individually and for us collectively, which I really, really enjoyed it, and another amazing read. So for my first question, I'd like to open up the floor and ask each of you, I'll start with Abi, about what inspired you to write The Girl with the Louding Voice.
Thank you for that question. So like you said, I grew up in Lagos. I was born in Lagos, which is a city in West Africa, in Nigeria. And in the neighborhood where I grew up in, which was a middle-class to affluent neighborhood, it was very common for families to have young girls as housemates, quite common actually. And growing up, I noticed that many of those girls were around about my age, and many of them were not educated. And so while I'll get dressed and go off to boarding school, many of those girls would stay behind and do the chores. Quite a number of them were not very well treated. So you could go into a restaurant, for instance, and you could instantly point out who the housemaid was, purely by how she was looking, tattered clothing, or the sad, haunted look in her eyes. And then when I left Nigeria and had my own children, when my daughter turned 8, we had a conversation that I asked her to do some chores, and she was trying not to do it. And I said to her, look, there are girls like you who are working for families in Nigeria, which I'd probably said to her a lot of times, but for some reason that evening it sparked a conversation around why would young girls go and work, why are they not going to school, why are they not very well treated. And so that led me to starting to do some research and looking back into my childhood and wanting to write a story that will give a voice to some of those girls that I knew growing up. And that's really what inspired the book.
It sounds like it was a narrative that was waiting inside you for a long time, in a way, you know, to be unearthed. Thank you for that.
I think she was.
Thank you, Abi. And Jennifer, can you tell us a little bit about what inspired the first woman, please?
I actually, what inspired me was the kind of images of African children that I was seeing in media, Western media, especially when you see adverts of some of the NGOs that work in Africa. Normally the children are skinny, they are fly infested, and they are looking miserable. And that's not the kind of childhood I had. And while there's suffering in Africa and there's a lack of food in certain places, not all African childhoods look like that. So for me, I wanted to talk about an African childhood that is not even middle class, that is that quite traditional, but very happy. That doesn't mean everything is perfect, but that African children are out there having fun. And I'm glad to hear that Abi talking about her childhood as a middle class, girl growing up. And in Uganda, we do have the same problem, Abi, among middle class families, where you have young girls coming in from poorer families and looking after these families. And often we don't think about what is happening to them. But I went on the other hand and decided to just write about an African child who's happy.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's a really interesting take, I have to say. And did you feel, why did you decide to set the novel in 1975, Jennifer?
Because while I was writing about a happy African childhood, the novel started to take on a very different route and a very different tone, and it started to look at the girl as a girl rather than as a child only. And so as I looked at her as a woman, it became interesting at when feminism arrived in Uganda, and that was in 1975. So once I went and looked back on the event of the Mexico 1975, the women's conference, because I think that's when I first started to hear, at least I remember hearing that. I was a child, but I remember my parents talking about it. So, and that's, I think, the first time I heard the word feminism. So I thought this was perfect. But once I chose 1975, then that affected what is going on around Kirabo in terms of politics, in terms of economics, and in terms of social and cultural aspects.
Thank you, Jennifer. I think that's really interesting what you're saying about feminism being like at the heart of the first woman, because to me it was also at the heart of The Girl with the Louding Voice. It was an exploration of what is feminism, but also how can other women empower other women in small and large ways. So how you can be radical by even just one encounter. So in The Girl with the Louding Voice, there's a character called Tia who has quite a profound effect on Azuni, although they don't spend a lot of time together. The effect is far-reaching. And I wonder, Abi, were you thinking about the relationship between women when you were writing The Girl with the Louding Voice?
I was, yes. I think that most of my writing anyway has a womanhood and feminism at heart, even though I don't realize it, but I tend to just lean into that consciously or subconsciously. And so in writing The Girl with the Louding Voice, I thought it was important for me right from the beginning of the book to show the power of female friendships, of mentorship, and to also show that sometimes women are enablers of patriarchy. So I try to look at the flip side as well. So yes, women can enable each other and help each other, and that's so critical, and how life-changing it can be. how if the class consciousness and the class barriers between us as humans can be melted away, that we can create such a great society. But on the flip side, how women also can be enablers of patriarchy and allow it to thrive by being silent. So I think I was trying to explore both angles in that relationship between Tia and Ajuni.
Yeah, thank you, Abby. I think you completely succeeded in that because I'm not spoiling anything here, but at the beginning of the novel, Aduni is married off, and she is the third wife to a man, Morofu, and it's really interesting and also upsetting in a way to witness the relationship between the three wives, which anyone can imagine would be very difficult. But there's great love and kinship in a way to be found in terrible circumstances. And then there's also great viciousness. So I think you perfectly captured both sides, even in that kind of beginning. You know, you can see how enabling and empowering kindness and friendship can be, but also how the opposite is just as poisonous, whether it's coming from the patriarchy or from another woman. And I wonder, Jennifer, if you could tell me a little bit more about my favorite character from your book, Nattetta, the blind woman. Would you be able to explain to us who she is and maybe talk about the genesis of her character?
Nattetta is one of those women you find in my culture, and I suspect in other African cultures, who just rebel. And because culture does not have a way of dealing with them, they are either called mad or witches. But Nattetta is perhaps at the opening of the book is in her 50s, and she has become a grandmother, although she never married, or although she never had child, but she is a grandmother because she's a woman on the village and she has helped with bringing up children on the village. But she had a relationship with her grandmothers, who were women perhaps from the 1800s, late perhaps 1890s, who were abducted and forced into marriages, and who dealt with their problems through storytelling and storytelling to her and using myth, and who then, when she grew up and had an education, she started to build on her grandmother's stories. And now, as she realizes that she's starting to fall sick, she decides to pass on these stories to Kirabo, whom she suspects might have the same disposition as hers.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's another very important topic in both books. Is there's the beating heart of storytelling and the power of stories to enable us to imagine better. I think for me that was very apparent in both books. That it was a thread that only intensified as the story went on. That the stories that we hear can lead us to greatness or to better things. You know, by imagination alone. You know, that we absorb those stories and then we go forth with them. And the characters in both of your books did that, in my opinion. And I wonder, Abby, did you find when you were younger, were there specific stories that you heard that you kind of absorbed or that stayed in you and strengthened you, quite like Aduni?
Yes, I think that, you know, culturally, like Jennifer said, you know, I think a lot of African storytellers, regardless of your social standing or your economic status, we tell stories. And I remember growing up, you know, my mother, who is a professor of taxation, the first female professor of taxation, very, very educated, still tells me stories. She told me stories as a child. She still told me a story yesterday on the phone. It's just the way we sort of communicate and help to enrich the imagination and help to let lessons stick, right? So a mother would probably not want to tell a child, you know, if you do this, something bad will happen to you. They can do that. But if you tell a story of somebody else who did it and something horrible happens to them, you find out that tends to have a more lasting effect. And so I also remember an uncle of ours. In fact, he wasn't an uncle. He was a family friend of my father's. And he was this very, you know, very polished, distinguished man who was very tall, very handsome. I remember going to his house when families would go over for barbecues, and he would just gather all the children, put them around his feet, and he would just tell us wonderful stories with his rich, deep voice. I remember that quite vividly. So storytelling has always been a part of me. And I even in secondary school, I went to an independent girls' school, and one thing I loved to do was to tell stories. So I would gather everyone in school and have them sit down, and I'll tell stories or write plays. And I think that's probably the genesis of my sort of storytelling, where I always say to people that I see myself more of a storyteller first before a writer. I would have told my stories in different ways. If I wasn't writing novels, I would have probably gone into film or into spoken word, anything to be able to get the stories out of me.
Thank you, Abi. That's really interesting that you see a delineation between being a writer and a storyteller. And I really like that. I think it fits into something that we have in Irish tradition, where you tend to have a person who's called a shanachie. It's an Irish word for a storyteller. And that idea is really strong in Ireland, of kind of gathering people and telling stories, and of the stories being passed down, orally transmitted. There is great power in that, and it's not the same as, I think, having a book, because the idea is that it's an oral tradition, Yeah, that's really interesting. And I wonder, Jennifer, for yourself, were there specific stories that you heard as a child that kind of stayed with you or that empowered you in any way?
Most of the stories you find in the book are stories that I had as a child.
Yeah, I was thinking.
Abi, for goodness sakes, you've lived the same life I did, down to the uncle who tells. I couldn't believe it when you were telling it. I thought, that's my life, though. Even at school, I was the girl in the dormitory, because I also went to a girls' school, an independent girls' school. And I was the girl who read novels. And then in the evening, after lights out, I would sit down the girls and tell them the story. And they would see me reading a novel and say, yeah, you're telling us tonight. And they say, yeah, absolutely. And perhaps I learned how to tell stories properly or write stories through that telling, because I would listen to the way the girls related to moments in my storytelling. Sometimes they would hold their head, their breath, and sometimes they'll be like, and I'm right there. So it's interesting. And you grew up in Nigeria, and I grew up down in Uganda. That is unbelievable. But yes, most of the stories you hear in The First Woman are stories that I grew up with. They're just perhaps elements that I twisted and turned, but that is the idea of storytelling, that a story is passed on to you. And often you get rid of redundant things that come from your parents or your grandparents' time, and then you add on aspects, and then you pass it on to your children. And that's how it keeps on going. So those are stories that I have learned, and I have then realized, and I don't know whether this is true for you, Abi, because the way I understood those stories as a child was so different. The way I understood them as a woman grown up, I didn't see any feminist elements or any elements of oppression in those stories as a child. But for my first degree, when we started doing African literature, we started with oral African traditions, and we were told that these stories are coded, and it's your job to decode and see what they were doing. And I quickly realized that most of African women, when they told their story, because of their patriarchy, they didn't say exactly what they were saying. It's hidden in there, and the joy and the beauty of discovering what our grandmothers were talking about. And for me, it was very important not to interpret it myself and write a story about it, but to take the reader through the interpretation of it.
Absolutely.
I think that's really beautiful, Jennifer. It's very empowering, I think, to say that I'm not going to explain this to you. I'm going to let you work this out for yourself, and come at it in a more organic way. And hopefully that the reader would actually go through all of those different levels that you're talking about, where first you read it and then you read it more critically, perhaps with more context, and then you start to work out the good and bad things that are hidden in those stories. You know, it's a real gift to give to readers, I think. It's that old adage of show, don't tell. You know, it's that you trust your readers to show them and let them interpret it as they will. I really like that. I wonder, Abi and Jennifer, could I ask you both to read? I think it would be so lovely if everyone could hear a little bit from the girl with the louding voice and the first woman. So Abi, would you like to go first?
Sure. So just let me know when to stop, because I tend to get carried away sometimes.
You're fine.
Okay, so I'm reading from chapter 29 of The Girl with the Louding Voice. And in this scene, Aduni, as a maid in Lagos, there's a party going on in the house, and this is what happens. Chapter 29, fact. With over 250 ethnic groups, Nigeria has a wide variety of foods. The most popular include jollof rice, skewered pieces of grilled and peppery meat called suya, and akara, a delicacy of bean fritters. Middle of the afternoon on Sunday, the whole compound is filling with different cars. It's like nothing I ever see. Cars with shape like aeroplane and helicopter, like boats and buckets. Some of them short with no roof. Others are tall like Big Madam's car. All of them are looking too costly. I don't see any women's coming down from the car because Big Madam say I should weeding the weed in the backyard grass. I ask her why she's wanting me to weed grass on Sunday afternoon. And she pick a stone from the backyard and use it to knock me hard in the head and call me idiot for daring to ask me questions. As I was pulling the grass in the outside on Sunday, Kofi called me to the kitchen. I'm going crazy here, he said. Go and wash your hands. I need your help. I washed my hands and Kofi gave me a tray full of small fried meats with green pepper and onions with toothpick in the middle of the meats. Here is the stick meat, he said. Take it inside the living room and serve all the women. I looked the tray. At the way Kofi arranged the meats in a circle style around the edge of the plate, with one small tomato at the center of the plate. I should just give them the meat, I asked, one by one, and the tomato, what am I doing with that one? That is not a tomato, Kofi said with a sigh. It's a cherry. It's used to garnish the plate. Leave it as it is, Aduni. I beg you. Don't touch the food. Do not attempt to pick up the food for anyone. If you touch it, Big Madam will pour it all into the bin and ask me to cook a fresh one. If that happens, Charlie, I will skin you alive. So keep your mouth shut, your head down, and hold out the tray and curtsy like this. Kofi bent his knee quick. Stand up. I repeat, do not speak to anyone. Serve the food and come back here. Is that clear? Now, where on earth did I put that pot of jollof rice? As I entered the parlor with the tray, I turned to the first woman standing in front of me. Her skin is a rich dark color, shiny, smelling like bitter oranges and firewood, a sharp, strange smell that sliced my nose and caused it to tickle. She's wearing a tight green dress, short to her knees area, the round top of her smooth breast peeping from the neck of it. Her hair is low cut, the brown of a tree bark, with one line on the side of it, parting from her ears to the middle of her head. Every makeup on her face is green color, except of the blood red lipstick on her lips. Even her eyes balls are a sharp green. I keep my eyes to the floor as I'm giving her the tray. Who is this one? She asked, talking with a high cracking voice, the voice of a too much smoker. Florence, is this the new maid you told me about? She's as useless as they come. Big Madam answered from one corner of the parlor as somebody laughed from somewhere by the TV. Where do you find them? One woman asked. My eye caught to that woman. She's wearing an Ankara dress, blue and white, with shine stone around the chest areas. There's a wig on her hair, big and round, as if she gummed hair on a football and put it on her head. The powder on her face is the orange of the evening sun. Her lips the same brown of the cut shoe on her feet. From your agent, Mr. Kola, I told you to stop using local agents. You wouldn't hear. The agency I use, Consult a Maid, they give me the best, all foreign. And I've told you guys this several times, Big Madam say. Mr. Kola is cheap and reliable. When Rebecca left, he found this one very quickly. I don't need a foreigner to clean my house for me. My children are abroad, so there's no fear of her harming them. You people that hire all these expensive Filipino nannies for your children, tell me, do they do better than these ones? All of them are useless. Having white skin and a strange accent doesn't make you a better worker. I hear some of you even pay them in dollars. Why on earth would I pay a housemaid in dollars in my own country and with the foreign exchange rate? Green eyes picked the meats, her nails long, green color to match her eyes, the tip of it curling into the finger. I'm fearing to think of how she would use that long nails to wash her buttocks in the toilet. What is her name? She asked. Come on, girl, raise your head. What is your name? I lift my head. Kofi said I must not be talking, but this woman is looking me with her green eyes, blinking, waiting for me to give answers. She make me think of a cat, a black cat with brown hair and green eyes and long nails. Thank you.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Abby. It's so lovely to hear it in your voice, because as readers will know when they read The Girl with the Louding Voice, it's written in such a distinctive style. Aduni's way of thinking and articulating herself is very unique, and I loved it. I think I listened to another interview with you and you described it as non-standardized English, and the thing is, it's completely readable and understandable. It's just that the way she plays with words is very fresh, and it makes for reading. It's sort of like reading Emily Dickinson. You know, when the language is there, but it's slightly juxtaposed in an interesting way, and it makes you pay more attention to it. And that's exactly how I found reading The Girl with the Louding Voice. So it's just an interesting thing that I want all readers to notice when they're reading, because it's very fresh and it makes for really engaging reading. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Jennifer, would you like to read from the first woman?
Sure. I'm going to read from chapter 6 of the first book. And this is the part where Kirabo has gone to the witch to ask her get rid of her propensity to fly out of her body, but also to find her mother. And she has returned, and the witch has told her, yeah, that I found your mother, but you can't see her yet. And this is how Kirabo reacts. When the tears reached her eyes, Kirabo ground her teeth. You cry for the living, you give death permission. The tears remain there, not spilling, not going back. There are two of you and one flies out, yes? Then be happy. Suta shook Chirabo's shoulder as if to loosen her pain. Look at me, Kirabo. You're not a witch. You're just special, eh? Grandfather says I'm special, but it came out as a wail. Well, he has discernment, that man, but I don't think he sees the whole picture. Listen, Suta leaned forward. You fly out of your body because our original state is in you. She poked Kirabo in a lucky you way. Original state? Yes. The way women were in the beginning. We were not like this. Of course not. Suta was indignant that as if this current state were contemptible. We changed when the original state was bred out of us. Kirabo looked at her hands as if to see the change. Was it bad what we were? Is it what makes me do bad things? No, it was not bad at all. In fact, it was wonderful for us. We were not squeezed inside. We were huge, strong, bold, loud, proud, brave, independent. But it was too much for the world, and they got rid of it. However, occasionally, that state is reborn in a girl like you. But in all cases, it is suppressed. In your case, the first woman flies out of your body because it does not relate to the way this society is. Oh, but how do we get rid of her? Get rid of it, child. It's a gift. Let it grow. Let us see what we were like, what we were capable of. How do you know all of this? I'm a witch. Do you mean I'm possessed? No, nothing like that. It's here. And Suta put her hand on Kirabo's heart. It is our story. Our story? It is an untold story. Untold? Her eyes lit up. It got buried a long time ago until it was forgotten. But you know it? I dug it up. In Kirabo's experience, there was nothing like telling a story no one else knew. It guaranteed you the undivided attention of the audience, no one questioning the facts, no judgment of how you told it, no one smirking like they had told it better. Then how was it bred out? In a lot of ways, Nsubuga stood up, arms last. Let me go out for a moment. There's no catching a breath with you, is there? Kirabo watched Nsubuga step outside towards her kitchen and wondered whether there's no catching a breath with you was a rebuke. She decided she was reading too much into it. Thank you.
That was beautiful, Jennifer. You can't see it, but I have goosebumps. That was really, really good. Yeah, such a powerful moment. Thank you so much. That was really beautiful. I have a few questions that I'm going to ask you guys from our avid readers and watchers. The first question is for Abi, and it is, how do you feel about the ending? Do you think it is a happy ending for Aduni? In some ways, I wondered if there was an opportunity for a sequel.
So to the sequel question, I always have one answer, which is that I didn't go into the novel thinking of writing a sequel, but my mother, who had not read a word of fiction in 30 years, read it and came up with a wonderful sequel for me. So somebody has done the work. I need to find the time to write it. But in terms of whether it was an happy ending or not, I think for this book, because it's very much based on real life, like it's not, I mean, Aduni's story is fiction, but there's so many girls like her. I think I wanted to have an ending that would make people reading the novel that have young girls as me, to let them realize that, look, there's an opportunity for change, right? That positive change can happen. So it could have ended in any other way. But I think I left it at the point where I wanted to say to people, listen, this can be a good thing, right? So I'm hoping that for Aduni, she ends up becoming what she wants to be. But in reality, many of those girls don't have those kind of opportunities. And many of them, to be honest, no one knows how they end up. Some just get married and some just disappear into the system. So I think for Aduni, it was the glimpse of the possibilities of what could happen. So you could take that as a happy ending, I think.
A very eloquent answer, Abi. I'm very happy to hear there'll be a sequel, though.
I'm not sure yet. We'll see.
And Jennifer, I have a question here for you, which is, in writing, or when writing, who do you consider to be your literary influences?
When it comes to writers, perhaps Toni Morrison is a big influence. She's such an influence that I normally have 2 of her books by my table, especially when I start editing. I always have The Bluest Eye and Sula there, because those are the books that remind me about language, but also not taking anything for granted, whether it's a word or phrase or sentence or paragraph. It must work hard or you get rid of it, because she have fiction, or her prose is very, very tight. And I write so much, I tend to throw away half of it. So I need someone there to remind me, that, don't just throw sentences, to whoever it may concern on the page. But another author called Sembena Usman, he's got God's Bits of Wood. Now, these are books that have influenced my writing without knowing. With Toni Morrison, I go for her, but then there are certain books that when I'm reading back on a book and then it hits me and I say, oh my God, that wasn't original. I picked that idea from this book that I read as a child or that I taught when I was still a teacher of literature in Uganda. So Sembena Usman is one of those influences that I only discovered after I started publishing. Another one is Okot Pabitek. This one is a poet from Uganda, but he was the biggest name out of Uganda in terms of literature, and we studied all his songs. But and now I realize that the way I write about intimate relationships and how easy it is for me to write about intimate parts of the body, I think it's something that I picked from Okot Pabitek. Or I got permission from him.
Oh, that's such a beautiful way of putting it, about getting permission from writers in that sense, that they kind of unlock something in you. And I think it's quite telling that you were saying that you studied him when you were quite young, you know, so they're words that have been in your mind and in your soul for a long time, you know, and maybe not quite knowing what they're working on, but they've always been in there tinkering away, you know. Thank you so much, Jennifer. The next question is for both of you. I might start with Abby, but it is, do you remember as a child the first time you realized the power of words and writing?
Maybe not as a child. So I would kind of flip it on the head because recently my mother brought a family album that I had at the age of 4 or 5. I had basically desecrated, if I use that word, with speech bubbles, and I had put in thoughts and conversation and dialogue over the heads of each of the images. And I was struck by that because I realized, so my parents got divorced at, I think I was about 15. And then looking at the speech bubbles I put in there, you know, there's an image of my mother and father, and my mother was asking, this was me at 5 saying, why are you not smiling? And my mom was replying saying, because I'm upset with you. And it's funny because looking back, I'm thinking, it's amazing how you're taking things as a child and you're channeling what is your talent, your gift, you know, through the power of storytelling, and you're putting it over an album, and you don't realize just how powerful that is. So I think that struck me as an older person. But I think younger, it was writing letters. So my mom traveled quite often for work, and by the time she came back, I would have letters under her bedroom door reporting everything that happened around, and things that she asked and things she didn't ask. I would write it on the letters, and she would read them and laugh and laugh and laugh. And I just love to see the delight on her face. And I think that made me realize I need to do this for other people. I need to make other people quite happy with pieces of my writing.
Abby, that's brilliant. That's the best response I've heard to that question before. That's so lovely and so tangible. You know, like you said, that your first reader was somebody who took such delight in your words, so that, you know, inspired you to do that for more people. And that is what both of you do. But thank you. That was a lovely answer. And what about you, Jennifer? Do you remember the first time as a child when you realized the power of words and writing, or sometime around your youth?
For some reason, I found out the power of words in the most wicked way possible. I used to fight a lot with my brother who comes after me. And whenever our parents came back and they would ask us to put our side of the story, I quickly realized that I could tell the story and get my brother in more trouble than he was. You know, I would let him tell his side of the story and get some of his words, embellish them in my story. And by the time I'm done with him, he was getting more beaten. You know, I realized so quickly that I had the power to tell my story in a very powerful way that the rest of my siblings did not. And so they started to say, no, you can't trust her words. I would not lie. It's just that the way I would tell the same story would be very different. And even when I went to school, I quickly realized that if I'm telling a story, the way I tell it was not the same way the rest of my friends. And soon people would realize and say, do not listen to Jennifer. She twists words around. But at that time, I didn't realize that it would be very useful for me as an author. I think I only realized when I was doing my A-levels, we were asked to write plays, you know, as, you know, house competitions. And I wrote the play for my house. And of course, I directed it. And of course, I was the main star. And at the end of it, we did very well. And for the first time, the school started to notice me. And I thought, oh, this is good, actually, you know, because I was a nobody before then. But the play kind of opened the school's eyes to who I was or what I was. But now when I meet my friends, they reminded me that, we should have realized that you were an author, but, I didn't at the time.
That's a brilliant answer, Jennifer. Again, I'm so struck by how both of your answers reference directly to kind of moments where you realize the power of words in a very tangible way, in how they, with you, how they affected your brother or your family, and Abi, with you, how they affected your mother. I think that's very telling, and I can only imagine, but I think that must be incredibly comforting to have that in both of your hearts when you're writing, to be able to see that direct power of your words always, and to know that that's where it started, the genesis of your inspiration and of your craft, is really lovely. I have three more questions that I'm going to get to, and then I'll close up. The first one is, Jennifer, would you be able to just repeat the names of those three, the two authors and one poet who you were saying? And we just have a few listeners who want to take note.
The author was Sembene Usman. He's from Senegal. The title is God's Bits of Wood.
Perfect. And then you were talking about Toni Morrison, and then there was one other one.
Then there was Okot Pebitek. Okot is Okot P with a hyphen. Bitek is Bitek. And he wrote songs. He wrote poems, but there were songs. So Song of Ochol, Song of Malaya, Song of Lawino, and Song of Prisoner. Oh, I remembered them.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And then I have a question for both of you from Joe Webley Brown. And Abi, I'll start with you, but the question is, it's quite a gushing question. It's a good one. So what are your top tips on how to structure a plot well? Your stories are so gripping throughout.
Oh gosh, how to structure a plot well. I think the classic beginning, middle, and end is probably the best way to start. I mean, and when I say beginning, I mean it's important to start the story with, something that your character is in the middle of doing something, or there's something that causes your reader to feel that I need to keep going on. I need to find out that, there needs to be a want that your reader needs to find out. And then just making sure that you kind of have that nice narrative arc through without being too sort of technical about it. But I feel that when you read any story, any book, you're pretty much clear as to what the beginning is, what the middle is, where sort of all the great, wonderful things happen, and then having a nice conclusion at the end, as well. But I think because novels can be structured in different ways, I'll say those are the three major things I would say. And then depending on the kind of story you want to tell, if you're going to, for instance, Jennifer's novel sort of has a bit of flashback, we go into the past and then we come into the present. But in each of those, nice chunks, there's still that beginning, middle, and end. So I think it sounds simple, but it's not as simple as it sounds. But I think that's the easiest way to say, just make sure that your structure is quite solid, having those three things.
Super. Thank you so much, Abi. It's brilliant advice. And Jennifer, what about you?
I totally agree with Abi. I actually do the plotting. I plot 3 times. I plot in the beginning before I start writing, because for me, the story tends to be knocking around in my head for years, 3 or 4 years, while I work on other things. So when I start writing, I do plot out the story, beginning, middle, and ending, and then I write. But of course, stories go in all sorts of directions. They change their minds. So in the middle, I still plot again, because I need that to be aware of the journey, where the story is going. And even when I finish, I plot it out again, and to make sure that it's working. But I always start with the problem. I don't linger a lot introducing the character, because for me, that's where I stop reading when I'm reading other books. So normally I start at the trigger event, something happens to the character. The story starts to move on. It's until I know that I've got the reader's confidence that I have something to say and that I'm going to entertain you, then I start to look back on flashbacks or embellish and go into detail and focus on place as well. But I tend to be aware how, the events are plotted and how they they relate or they lead into each other. Now, where I start sometimes I can decide at the end of the book and say, no, this part is most interesting to start. But that doesn't change the book. It just means that that's going to be chapter 1, and chapter 1 might be chapter 9.
Super. Thank you, Jennifer. I've been taking notes of both your answers here. I think they're really insightful to start in the middle of the action. And I've also taken on board your comment, Jennifer, about actually looking at the plot again at the end. I think that's really good advice, because sometimes you can be so kind of imbued or immersed in the story that you forget to kind of step back. And again, with starting in the middle of the action, that makes complete sense, Abi. And that's exactly what happens in The Girl with the Louding Voice. Very quickly, Adoni's situation starts to change, and you're kind of like, oh no, I wanted more of before. So yeah, I'm going to say thank you so much to both of you. We've got loads more questions in, but I'm afraid we just don't have time to go through them. But it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to both of you, and everyone go out and buy a copy of The Girl with the Louding Voice and The First Woman. I promise they're both amazing, goosebump inducing, as I said earlier, and you'll fall in love with the characters. So thank you both so much, and we wish that you were in Dingle, but hopefully we'll see you there soon. Thank you.
Thank you for hosting us, Mia, and thank you for everybody who's tuned in.
Same here. Thank you all.